Fine, thanks. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And so I'm talking about a reactor, although the UK, of course, is no longer part of Europe, of course, in terms of pollution control, it clearly is. I'm using as an example the reactor of Hunterston B, which is in fact Scotland, which in a year or two may also become part of Europe. So next slide, please. Okay, so no, go back. Okay, so the Hunterston B, it's one of the early 965 megawatt AGRs, nuclear power plant. Its operation started in '76, and its original operational lifespan is about 35 years, with planned closure in 2011. The closure date extended by the Office for Nuclear Regulation, at EDF's request to 2023. And so Hunterston B is now 45 years old and constructed pre-9/11, pre-Fukushima, and clearly pre any ideas about global warming. Key external risks not considered in its design base, along with all of the UK sort of 900 megawatt fleet, which is a substantial amount of the fleet, include reactor and spent fuel pond vulnerability, rather like in France, especially plane crash potential, military and loaded large civil, and similarly in France, of course. Next slide, please. Along with a lot of other nuclear plants, Hunterston B has a history of technical problems, more specifically insulation degradation, graphite, and we'll come back to graphite oxidization, boiler spine cracking, boiler superheating cracking, and the key, which is graphite cracking. And the most significant risk is, of course, graphite cracking of the core moderator. And again, I'll talk about that in greater detail in a while. So I guess, getting to the conclusions early, not only are there significant certainties about the structural integrity and residual strength of Hunterston B graphite moderator core, but also cracking in the boiler spines were also identified as far back as 2014. There's also deterioration of heat exchangers located in concrete around the reactor, the RPV, the reactor pressure vessel, and of the graphite core. These two are, of course, the two key life-limiting factors for all UK AGRs. Next slide, please. So, there are 7 graphite keyway cracks at Hunterston B. The role of the graphite moderator is to slow down the fast neutrons to allow the chain reaction to continue. So irradiation damages the structure of the graphite. And the symptoms include graphite weight loss, brick cracking, and as the number of brick cracks increase, the core distortion increases, which gives the potential for the whole system to fail. The graphite core cannot be repaired or replaced. Channels also run through the bricks, which enable key safety mechanisms, such as entry of the control rods, designed to shut down the reactor in an emergency. So cracked graphite bricks may cause safety mechanism failure in a severe event, causing the nuclear fuel to overheat, resulting with a radiological release. So the presence of keyway cracks risks the core could become misaligned, and the fuel modules could get stuck in the core. So if this happens, the fuel temperature would rise and the core could undergo a melt. If the radioactivity gets into the gas stream and the reactor is venting because it's overpressurized, then radioactive release to the atmosphere follows. So it's, it really is quite serious. So it's a very specific form of cracking forming in pairs opposite each other, potentially splitting graphite bricks into two. Next slide, please. What's troubling about a lot of this is the way that the regulator has acceded to EDF's demands about increasing the number of cracks in graphite. So in 2015, EDF declared cracks in 3 of the graphite bricks in 1 of the Hunterston B reactors. By 2016, and we're seeing a kind of a ramp here in terms of problems. Over 350 cracks had been detected, an unexpectedly large increase over the previous 77 cracks identified. Sorry, 2018, over 350 cracks were detected. 2017, 77 cracks identified. And all of this is more than EDF's modeling had predicted, and clearly breaching its original operating safety limit. EDF then requested UK Office for Nuclear Regulation, ONR, to relax the crack limit to allow the reactor to restart, proposing permission to run with up to 1,000 cracks. And controversially, ONR revised the safety case and doubled the crack limit that it had previously set. Next slide, please. Interestingly enough, ONR themselves say that EDF safety analysis is, I quote from the ONR report, inherently subjective. So there seems to be a big question about ONR's regulation, sufficiency of regulation of EDF's running of the older reactors in the UK. Now, because of all of this, you can't really hide all this kind of stuff. So EDF will now shut down Hunterston B. There's been a huge furore in the UK about all of this, and it will now decide to shut down Hunterston B early, with decommissioning to begin in January 2022. However, in the interim, EDF secured approval to restart one of Hunterston's reactors for an initial 6-month period after it's been shut down for a 2-year period, by the way. However, according to EDF, running this old nuclear reactor for another year could cause cracks in its core to rise by 65%, a very significant number. But even that large number of significant cracks won't reach the reactor's operating limit, the ONR's operating limit for the cracks, because of a 4-fold increase submitted by EDF and agreed once again by ONR, the UK regulators. Despite, as discussed, ONR describing EDF's safety analysis as, quote, inherently subjective, and that EDF's methodology for demonstrating that the reactor is safe is, quote, approaching its limit of viability. Next slide, please. So in total, the latest estimate put the number of cracks, and this is nearly a year ago, August 2020, at 570, predicted that it could rise to 781 after 6 months operation and 943 after a year, which, according to EDF, would not exceed the current established damage tolerance level of 1,331 cracks. Now, what's kind of worrying about all of this is nearly all of Britain's nuclear fleet is composed of similar reactors, these advanced gas-cooled AGRs, advanced gas-cooled reactors. And of course, the factor of aging in that type of reactor is clearly cracks in the graphite bricks. And the key problem about all of this is that the cause of this damage is not fully understood. Just go back again. Just go back again a little bit. One slide back. And back again. Okay, so Given the weight loss in graphite blocks and graphite cracking occurs in all UK HERs, the Hunterston B example has significant implications across the entire UK HER fleet. Next one, please. Which, of course, will bring us to decommissioning, which so far, in terms of the UK, is supposed to cost about 132 billion for the HER fleet. Decommissioning not to be completed for another 120 years, according to PAC, the UK Public Accountability Committee. So thank you very much. I was just using, just to regroup, I was just using Hunterston B as an example of the kinds of issues that the majority of the UK fleet is facing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation. Your very interesting presentation. So we are now at the Q&A session. We already received a couple of questions. I invite everybody also to ask more questions. So one question from Wolfgang Renneberg to Gabriele. Are there licenses that are strictly limited so that it would be needed to apply for a new comprehensive and integral new license procedure?
For example, in the Loviisa case, the operational license is limited until 2027, I think. And also in the Rivner case, it is a limited license that was issued for 30 years. That is from 1980 to 2010, and this has been extended. So, I also saw in the question answers that Patricia Lawrence sent a link to this OECD NEA publication. There is a list of countries who have unlimited licenses and who have limited licenses. So, a list of countries who answered the questions of the OECD and NEA.
Okay, thank you. And there is another question, which is to Yves. What is the status on the implementation of the hardened core, and how many nuclear power plants already implemented the hardened core concept in France?
Well, it's not very easy to answer that, because I mean the hardened core doesn't come as just one thing. It is a combination of the ultimate power source, the ultimate water supply, some other components. The current situation is that the ultimate diesel generator, which is a very heavy one, bunkerized one, has been eventually implemented for each of the reactors. This was only complete by February this year, when it was supposed to be done by the end of 2018. The ultimate water source is implemented on some of the reactors, but far from all of them. And one of the issues is that for some years, what is expected is that these ultimate water supply or power supply will kind of depend to work well of sending the so-called nuclear action force that has been trained by EDF and is meant to go on a site which faces an accident to implement the backup safety devices. I mean, the hardened core will only be complete when, for instance, the ultimate water supply is linked to the reactor core and linked to the spent fuel pool with robust piping, which itself is independent from the rest of the system and robust to extreme hazards. Also, when independent INC system, also robust, will be implemented, and so on. And these kind of last details, which are crucial for reaching the state of an independent hardened core, will only be implemented between 2030 and 2040, depending on the reactors. So we are still almost 10 years before the hardened core as it exists on paper is implemented in reality on all reactors.
Thank you very much. There is another question to Paul. Why has the UK nuclear regulator so meekly accepted EDF's safety case time and time again?
Yes, I mean, that really is a very good question. And, you know, there's an issue, is the Office for Nuclear Regulation a watchdog or a lapdog? And there's a whole discussion about nuclear regulation in the UK. I mean, part of it is because those who regulate were in the past part of the industry. So there's a relatively cozy relationship between the industry and the regulators. And there is a general suspicion, there's a general feeling about those commentators who look more deeply into this issue that ONR are not doing their job correctly. On the other hand, the other issue concerns issues of uncertainty, complexity, sort of indeterminacy about latent risks. In other words, how far the safety cases can be proven, how far the risks can be proven, given the fact that destructive testing is impossible, and you can't go into the places that you really want to look at. EDF have a vast sort of modeling factory where they spent a huge amount of money into trying to model this graphite depletion. And I think that has probably impacted and affected ONR's thinking about this. So at base, I think basically there is a too cozy relationship between ONR and Office for Nuclear Regulation and EDF. And I don't think really that can be denied.
Thank you, Paul. There is another question which is also addressed to you. Why will the decommissioning of the HER reactors take so long? For light water reactors, this takes about 15 to 20 years.
Well, I was part of this discussion, and whereas industry said, well, we can get a man into the REV after 15 or 20 years. The reality is you could get a man in with full MBC for 15, 20 seconds or so. And so the general discussion in the UK has normally devolved to, well, wait and see. We'll wait for the half-lives to diminish. We'll wait significantly for the half-lives to diminish, and then we'll go in then. And that has largely been accepted by counter-experts and NGOs as well too. So not being in a rush to decommission is generally seen as a relatively good thing in the UK, hence extended decommissioning. The point about that is also questions of the money. in other words, discounting, and the argument for that has been won in the UK insofar as that the discounting for reactor decommissioning is now no longer allowed, and all that implies in terms of the ramping cost of reactor decommissioning.
There, if you wanted to also make a comment on one of the questions.
Yeah, I mean the one about I just wanted to emphasize what Paul said about the way the safety authorities in the UK or France tend to react to what EDF is bringing. I mean, Paul just mentioned the large modeling capacity of EDF. I mean, there are 10 EDF engineers working on life extension in France for one in IRSN at least, and probably more than that. So they are bringing a lot of information. They are bringing a lot of pressure on the technical support organization, IRSN, and the safety authority. And I mean, IRSN and ASN tend to be kind of like captured by this enormous capacity and to be driven to accept some like revision of margins, like new demonstration, which shows that with exactly the same reality, there is more margin than thought before. I mean, we see that kind of process, and we see, and I just wanted to emphasize that ASN, and I think it's the same for ONR, just lack the capacity to monitor
Yes.
the impact of all these changes,
Absolutely.
both in terms of reduced margins and in terms of increased uncertainties. And they just, I mean, they are in some denial of their lack of capacity to monitor that, which puts them in an increasingly fragile situation when it comes to assessing what EDF brings.
Okay, thank you, Yves. I have good news. Stephen Thomas is here, but we just have to wait until he's moved to the main session. In the meantime, there is another question to Yves. The question is, EDF is under such financial pressure at the moment. Does it have the resources to complete all those proposed lifetime extension?
The obvious answer is no. But no, the point is, I mean, no doubt EDF is under extreme financial pressure. What EDF and the French government have decided is that the best way to deal with that situation is to go for a massive life extension, because that means keeping the reactors bringing some income rather than tilting to paying for their decommissioning. Although that income doesn't make the reactors making profit. I mean, their competitiveness on the market is something else, but the government is pushing very hard to develop a kind of financing scheme which would guarantee EDF for a kind of competitive tariff for this life extension. So it has been decided that this was the less financially damaging for EDF. But that doesn't mean EDF has the resources to deal with the reinforcements. And that is where we have this strong contradiction between this strategy of massive life extension, the lack of resources for EDF to implement the kind of reinforcement that is at stake, and the strong statements by ASN on the reinforcements required to go for life extension. The hardened core concept has been crucial in dealing with that contradiction, because bringing the hardened core concept brings reinforcements at maybe a lesser cost than reinforcing the concrete slab or reinforcing the structure of the reactor building or the spent fuel pool, for instance. But that's only part of the answer. The other way to deal with it is first to accept some reduction of margins and increase of uncertainties. That is my previous comment. And also to accept some delays in the implementation, which tend to increase faster than implementation itself. So we will see where that leads. But I mean, in short, the consequence of that contradiction or the financial, the lack of financial resources for EDF is to degrade the level of requirements and implementation that should go with life extension.
Now we have Stephen on board. Stephen, there were a lot of questions when you were gone after your presentation. And one question was asked from several persons. Please, could you comment on how refurbishment could be uneconomic compared to new builds, which was stated, I think, by several speakers.
Right. I think it's incomprehensible that it would be cheaper to build a new plant than to life extend an existing one. I think the calculation a utility will be making will be the obvious ones. How long will the life be extended? And I think must be a concern for EDF that ASN is talking about 10 years, whereas EDF wants 20 years. I think there is the question of the risk of the upgrades. How difficult are they? I mean, some of them will be very straightforward, but retrofitting a core catcher could be a very complex thing to do. It could overrun, costs could overrun, times could overrun. So it might be problematic. I think the less obvious ones would be that the concern that utilities don't want to retire nuclear capacity because it preempts the market. If they're in a competitive market, nuclear power sits at the bottom of sits at the top of the merit order. It's always used. If they retire it, new capacity can come in and they would have to compete against that. So I think they would be looking at their competitive position. I think the other issue they might be thinking about would be the position of their decommissioning fund. And there is a well-known phenomenon with nuclear power plants that they are too old to live, too young to die. In other words, there isn't enough money in the decommissioning fund, so it may be better to keep running them at a loss than to start incurring the very heavy costs that decommissioning starts to impose.
Thank you very much. And then I just looked up another question that was asked when you were gone on your presentation. Maybe we can answer this one as well. What is your view on the Eastern European new reactor projects? What's your opinion? Do they have a chance to be realized? Will they ever be built? This was the question.
Right. I think you have to divide them into two. There will be Czechia and Poland, which are essentially new projects. They are both looking at 5 vendors, all of whom are problematic. There's opposition to cooperating with Russia and China, which might knock 2 of them out. The record of the Westinghouse and the Framatome designs is so awful that it would be hard to justify ordering those designs, which leaves you with the Korean design, and the Korean design does not meet European standards because it doesn't have either a core catcher or an in-vessel melt retention system. So it would need to be upgraded. Korea also has problems with its quality control. A lot of its reactors were delayed because they had to take out a lot of components that have been fitted because the quality control have been falsified. So it's not clear that there are any options for them. If we assume there are options, then you come on to the issue of financing, and the Czech package is quite extraordinary, that the government is offering 100% of the cost at 0% interest during the construction period and 2% interest during the operating period, which is a massive subsidy and might just be enough to make nuclear viable, but whether that sort of public subsidy is acceptable remains to be seen. The other two projects, the Romanian and the Bulgarian, are sort of Frankenstein projects which really make no sense. I mean, completing a 40-year-old reactor design, the CANDU one, makes no sense, and bringing in an American company to build a Russian design also doesn't seem to me to make any sense. And again, you have the problems of finance. That's why the Romanian project continues to fail, because nobody will finance it. So I think these are countries that are destined to fail. I think they will keep coming back despite those failures, but I think the likelihood of them going ahead is probably quite small.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Stephen, sorry. So we have no more questions. It seems that we are through with our questions. And in that case, I would ask the technical support to move us back to the main session, where we have another speech and the closure of the meeting.